vocês agora, o segundo keynote speaker, professor Lars Frolund.
Hello, everyone. Wow, thank you. So the exam question that I have for today is the following. How can Brazil not only participate, but win in the energy transition? You can compete in many ways. Most countries compete not to lose, but you can also compete to win. And I actually believe that this country has the strengths, both in terms of its industry, but also some of the entrepreneurs that we've seen here, to actually do more than just competing not to lose, but also competing actually to win. And some of the things that I'll mention are three different things. You need to start focusing significant amounts of money on what is called deep tech. Deep tech and deep tech companies are characterized by many things, and I'll sort of try to clarify this concept. And when I came in today, I heard Hudson talk about, he said, like, Professor Frolund, deep tech. I don't understand, Portuguese, but I think you had a previous conversation a little bit about what it is all about. But I think there's a fundamental thing about really understanding what deep tech is. And one fundamental thing that you need to focus on is actually being sure that you get the right type of inventions out of your universities. So you need to start, by the way, also there, if there's something that needs to be optimized. Then you need to start actually working differently with what comes out of universities. You need to have a much more, what I call, mission-oriented way of doing grant funding. So the grants are obviously the ones, when you actually fund research, you can also fund companies, but it's not with an equity, so it's a sunk cost. Grants that you give, but you need to do it in a different way, where you start thinking not from the left sort of to the right, but what I call where you actually start thinking from the right to the left. We actually start with reality and the problems in reality, and then try to connect that to the research that is being done. This sounds completely obvious. It is not. Most likely, most of the things going on in your country, as in many other countries, is trying to figure out wherever it comes from the left, to figure out, to see whether there's a problem to solve afterwards. So there's an enormous amount of solutions that comes out of the university that is searching for a problem. That's a problem. The last thing that I want to mention for you is that deep tech, as it comes to the market, also some of the startups that we've seen here, as soon as they actually get to the market and they become like a well-established company, to actually grow, they need what we call patient capital. They need a completely different type of capital that is much more long-term and is much more substantial in the amount of millions of euros that needs to be put into it. The way that I see it currently in Brazil, you do not have that. That's not a problem that you only have. It's a problem that actually most countries have. But you need to actually be able to provide the right type of capital to bring these things to the market. The great thing is that you have all the opportunities at hand. And I want to say something that might sound a little bit like, counterintuitive. One of the key reasons that you can win on the green transition is because you have a lot of companies that is actually in the opposite business. Because it's that talent that is there, and it's actually also their money and the way that you need to use in a different way. So that would be my three answers, and I'll try to go through those three answers that are, based on what is deep tech. And that particular sort of mission-oriented way to do grants, I'm going to connect to a quite famous American university called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And then talk about, at the last part, I want to talk about the last thing that I've been part of, which is establishing NATO's venture capital fund, the world's first multi-sovereign venture capital fund. I'll talk a little bit about that, because it's, once again, it's a solution to a particular problem. So, what is deep tech? Deep tech is an enormous amount of things. But if you look there, you can see a lot of it's characterized by, these are all sort of the buzzwords that you've all heard. If you double click on most of these things, you will find very, very deep university research and often patents and inventions that comes out of universities. Actually, one of the key fundamental descriptions of a deep tech venture is that it's kind of boring. It's bad television. It's based on physics. It's chemicals, it's chemistry, it's all those type of things. And it's often, by the way, not business to consumer, because that's the fun part of startups. It's business to business. But it actually is the part of deep tech ventures that really, really matters. So if you meet something that you don't really understand and it's kind of boring and it's bad television, it's probably fantastic in terms of the level of innovation that it can give to your country. That's just the truth of it. If you think about some of the really fundamental companies in, the energy sector, AI, and quantum technologies, it is very, very hard to understand what's going on, but we all know that it can be incredibly important for our countries. So that's just one of the few rules. If nothing from this sort of presentation you can take, if somebody to ask you the question, what is deep tech? You say, well, if you don't understand it and it's boring, then that's it. So, as it says there, one of the key things that really distinguishes deep tech is that it takes a long time. It takes a long time to develop within the university, and it takes even longer time outside of the university to actually bring it to the market. Here's one example. It's an extreme example, and it's an example that I know because it comes out of MIT. It's an MIT lab that created Commonwealth fusion systems. So it's a very bold statement that they say that they will quite soon will have commercializable fusion energy. And the ones that have been in the fusion energy business will say, oh, once again, somebody is saying that we can do fusion energy. What is interesting here is that they seem to actually be on track on this. They have now created the world's best or most powerful magnet. And one of the key things that we see in this deep tech example, which is quite interesting for the ones that do investment in this area, is that why have they got, so look at the numbers, by the way, of the investments that they need. A Series A of $200 million and a Series B of $1.8 billion. No private venture capital has that amount of money. You need to think completely differently about how you do patient capital. We'll get there soon. What is interesting also about this company, I don't want to spend too much time there, but it's an interesting feature that we're seeing from deep tech or from a deep tech venture. Obviously, this comes from university. Most of the people on this company have a PhD and all that, blah, blah. We actually do not really know how they do it, but it's incredibly powerful what they can do. Of course, it'll be probably the biggest revolution, since we sort of invented, I don't know, the wheel, right? The key point here is that why are people investing in this right now? Is because that world's most powerful magnet can already be sold. So what is characteristic for many of the deep tech ventures is that they are very mission-oriented. There's a goal out here that they need to achieve. It might take them 5, sometimes even 10 years to get there, but actually to achieve that, there are intermediate steps that allows for investors to actually invest in the company because they're already on the market with that. It's quite interesting to think about. That deep tech ventures often have an intermediate product which actually make them investable before they actually reach their final product. That's an interesting feature, and the reason that a lot of these actually get a lot of funding. And once again, just to underline, Commonwealth Fusion Systems is a very extreme example, also in the amount of money. But around now, deep tech in Europe, the Series B investments for deep tech in Europe right now is about 50 million euros. For those that know the venture capital landscape in Brazil and in most of the world would know that it is very, very hard to find 50 million euros for a Series B investment, sometimes even for a product that has not even reached the market. It's still technological risk, which is just a fancy way of saying we actually do not know whether this works or not. But still, these bets need to be made. So what are some of the challenges of deep tech ventures? I don't want to go through this, but it's one of the things. It's just a great sort of template or a way to present it. Obviously, there's a long time to market. There's big development cost, but there's also some upside, right? Which is that there's often high barriers actually for the others, and there's some high spillovers, which is actually important for a country as they invest into this area. Otherwise, I would say that some of the key sort of challenges that we need to solve is that there's a big technological risk. Many of these companies actually are developing something where they still need access to university labs. This, by the way, is one of the key things that you as a country need to figure out. And I know for a fact that you haven't figured it out yet, which is, as soon as a startup comes out of the university, they do not any longer have a seamless access to the university's machinery and all the laboratories. They actually need to still have that. It sounds like this is crazy, but this is, and it's very detailed, by the way, I acknowledge. Once again, deep tech is boring. It's not really, but having a seamless access to university machinery as you leave the university and it is not any longer a part of the university is just crucial. And you need to simply work on that. And this graph here, just to underline one of the key points that I've already touched upon, which is to say that actually what's going on in the world is that there are two things that are predominantly funded. Pharma and biotech, because of very particular reasons, and software as a service. Everything in between is very, very hard. That's a problem. The way to say this, another way is to say that we are in the lack of patient capital for urgent challenges, because it's everything that lies in between there that we actually need to, for example, solve, moving towards the green transition. Is everything that does not actually get sufficient funding right now. Software as a service gets a lot of funding, because that's where you can get rich fast. That's predominantly why money is going there. And it's easy to figure out whether you can be successful or not. In everything in between, it's very, very hard. That's just the way it is. It's a problem that can be solved. And if you want to win the race of the green transition, you actually need to collectively solve it. So I just want to talk a little bit about DARPA and one way to look about how you can reorient your grant giving, the way that you fund research, to be sure that when they sort of reach the stage where they want to go into the world, that they're actually targeting problems in the world. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, was obviously created in 58, right after the Sputnik event of 57. It was created not to ever again to create technological surprise in the US. What is very, very interesting is some of the famous results. So DARPA was some of the first funders for GPS, stealth, Siri, internet, drones, but also mRNA. 2012 and 2013, DARPA did the investments into Moderna and CureVac, which is actually quite interesting, because at the time, nobody wanted to invest in those companies. mRNA was regarded as being science fictional. Don't go there. NSF, NIH said, don't fund it. Then DARPA said, oh, then we'll fund it. Luckily, they funded it, right? And that's why we got a vaccine so fast. What's interesting with the way that DARPA works is that, and that's the next slide, this is just then an old example, is that they try a model that's really about what they call use-inspired basic research. Our world is divided into dichotomy of either basic research or applied research. Sometimes you can say the basic research is done by scientists and the other one is done by engineers. It's not really how it is. So what DARPA is very, very good at is defining a very, very, very specific and discrete problem on the right-hand side and then working backwards and say, we need to achieve these specific goals, these specific milestones that we then fund to actually achieve this. So one of the most sort of classic examples is that why do we run around with, a GPS and all that in our small phones today? Is because this project was put forward with the mission of realizing a battery-operated handheld receiver with military Pico capability of max 10 pounds. The first part of that sentence is absolutely no problem. What drove towards what we have today is the 10 pounds. They set an absolutely extreme target of what they wanted of technological capability and then tried to work towards that. And that drove what we have today in the world around miniaturization in general. So what's interesting here is that they actually said this is a specific goal on the right-hand side, understanding what the world needs, and then they funded separate universities and companies to actually develop something that will work like that. And by doing so, they created miniaturization of all the things that we have and everything that we actually have. Fantastic. Why are we not doing a lot of that? I don't know, but we're not. Most of nations are completely caught in a very, very basic system, which is that either we give money to basic research, which is, I want my freedom, I'm a researcher, give him some money, or we do the exact opposite. We end up in idiotic procurement, where we've completely predefined what we need, and there's absolutely no surprise. So either it's complete freedom or it's complete prison. What is interesting about the DARPA way is that it actually creates a total new model of user-inspired basic research to drive what our society actually needs, and in doing so, it creates scientific novelties. Do more of that. Last example, coming back to what can one do about the problem of patient capital. This came out of a very clear understanding that for NATO to participate in the world of technology development, there was a need to also be an equity holder to do equity investments. This is a 15-year fund set up by 22 nations. It's the world's first multi-sovereign venture capital fund, and it focuses on Series A and follow-on investments. I think you need a new venture capital fund in Brazil that can do some of the growth investments, because here's the risk. For those fantastic startups that were up here, most of these startups, because they're startups, will not be successful. That's the way it is. But for those that are successful, we need sufficient capital to become a large conservative company, right? All companies will want to start up. But to get there, they need some equity investments. They are not there. These were grants. They need seed investments, Series A investments. In most countries, it actually stops there. But in deep tech, the problem is, for most of these novel things that you put into the world, you also actually need to have innovation even in production. It is very, very, very expensive. So for Brazil, at the end, to not only produce startups, but also have startups that stays in Brazil and become great companies that employ a lot of people, you need to have a vehicle of patient capital where maybe your state, your family offices, your pension funds, your high net worth individuals get together and say, we need to solve this very specific problem. Because I can assure you, for the most successful ones, they will not stay here if that money is not there in terms of equity investments as an alternative. Where they will go is where that money is. That could be the US, or it could be China. So for you to do investments in this area, you also at the same time need to secure and protect your investments as a society and say, we need also to get the fruit out of this at the end of the day. So that's why I'm urging you to get together and create a new type of fund, a new type of vehicle in Brazil that can actually solve this problem of patient capital. If not, the two companies of those that actually become quite successful will go elsewhere, and they will be successful elsewhere. And that's fantastic for them, but it's not fantastic for Brazil. Thank you.